Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. What does the Lakers rotation look like next year? Is Rui a starter? Is Anthony Davis going to play the 4 or the 5? What are we looking at? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. Always free, never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with about 20,000, over 20,000 now subscribers to the channel, many of whom weighed in on our show for Wednesday, talking about Anthony Davis and whether or not you are not accepting necessarily, Andy, of the idea that he's going to get an extension offer from the Lakers, about $170 million before training camp starts, perhaps as early as this week, but whether you're excited about it. And more people were like, yeah, I'm on board with this than, to be perfectly honest, I was expecting.
No, I think there is appreciation for Anthony Davis as a player, even if he sometimes leaves you wanting for more. It is hard to be, consistently one of the 5 best players in the league and really truly feel rock solid on that level, feel like your bad performances or, okay performances are far more exception than rule. Once you start becoming one of those guys, you are basically LeBron or Kobe or Jokic, Giannis, Steph. And you know what? Those guys are rare even by all NBA caliber Hall of Fame standards, Yeah,
and it's not just AD, it's a reflection of the direction of the new CBA is taking teams and the problem that comes if you have a guy who is eating, 25%, 30% of your cap, who isn't quite worth that money, who isn't in that echelon of player. But hey, I was expecting there, like for example, there was a little bit more for, I believe it was Tuesday's show when we talked about LeBron James and, the statue question. And, not a lot of people supporting like LeBron deserves a statue, but there were more people.
He doesn't deserve a statue.
Right. I'm saying that part, that's not what I'm getting at. But there were more people in the comments who were resistant to the idea of retiring his number than I thought there would be. Just when you kind of go back and look through that conversation, I was surprised by that. And so I was also a little bit surprised by the enthusiasm for the AD extension. So anyway, yeah, we love to use the comment section as an inspiration for content for the show, particularly right now, this part of the year. Ask us questions, send us questions and comments, and we'll try to wrap them all into what we do here. D'Angelo Russell was on Pat Beverly's podcast, which, if you've never seen it, is very Pat Bev. Strong Pat Beverly vibes from the Pat Bev podcast. Had some interesting stuff to say. We'll get into that. Austin Reeves and Team USA. But first, Andy, Jovan Buha has our friend at The Athletic, does a great job covering the team for The Athletic, has a story up that it's an early breakdown of what the rotation might look like now that we're pretty much set, save that 14th player, ostensibly a big, perhaps Christian Wood. A lot of really interesting stuff to pull out of it. Where do you want to start?
The idea that Anthony Davis could potentially end up starting at the 4, whether it's because you bring in somebody like Christian Wood, who is, if nothing else, an offensive match alongside Anthony Davis. The two of them can fit together on that side of the ball. Defensively is more of an issue, but frankly, there's nobody Christian Wood is a great match with defensively. So in that sense, it doesn't matter.
The problem is Christian Wood, not Anthony Davis.
Right. Or if, say, Jaxson Hayes, who Rob Pelinka has talked about in bullish terms, that the two of them together, you'd have to start figuring out who is the backup big off the bench in that situation, period. But I don't think, to be perfectly honest, it is feasible for Anthony Davis to start at the 4, no matter who this person is that you're bringing in or is still on the roster. because you would be at that point playing LeBron James defensively as a 3. And that to me is a non-starter, period. So unless you can find either center X, big man X who can man the middle defensively while Anthony Davis is guarding 3s, or this other center is the one guarding 3s while Anthony Davis is like manning the middle as
it's
your
a lot of work.
line.
But none of those people are Jaxson Hayes or Christian Wood.
That player doesn't exist. Like, it's not a real person who I'm trying to describe. I'll tell you who I'm describing. I'm describing LeBron in his prime. Right. Like, that's who I'm talking about.
He's an AI composite at this point.
This person doesn't exist. Much less for a veteran's minimum. He definitely doesn't exist.
For what it's worth, and we would certainly encourage people to go, if you can, read it at The Athletic and look at this chart. Jovan does not actually have Jaxson Hayes starting.
No, he doesn't.
In fact, he only has Jaxson Hayes playing about 10 minutes a game. So, which I think is actually potentially quite realistic. But it is something that keeps coming up whenever you hear Rob Pelinka talk about the roster, when you hear reports about kind of what the Lakers are thinking and what are some of the stuff they'd like to do. And when you combine that with the well-known inclination for Anthony Davis to prefer the 3 or the 4 over the 5, it's something that is going to stay live until we get into the season and Jaxson Hayes or center X isn't starting. I tend to agree with you. And I think you can make a stronger argument with it around Wood than you can Hayes, because Wood is a more dynamic player, at least on one end of the floor. But if a goal here, and this is something else that Jovan talks about, the Lakers are going to be very conscious of, if the goal is to limit the wear on LeBron, setting him up to have to run around with small forwards isn't the way to do it.
No, it's you are better off having LeBron as your center defensively than you are.
You really are. No, you're right. You're right.
As a 3. I mean, like, again, if you want to set up something where AD guards 3s, Christian Wood guards 4s, and mythical Christian Wood or Jaxson Hayes or whoever, and LeBron's your 5, it's not ideal, but it's better than him guarding 3s. There's too much configuration and gymnastics involved to really make this feasible. I just don't think it's possible.
Right. Especially when the goal is to take, and while AD might prefer the 4 over the 5, the history with the Lakers has, they've been better when AD is playing center. And moreover, the construction of this roster, and this is something else that we've talked about, that Jovan's, it's not just LeBron. It's if you're kind of setting up Hayes to be in a position where he's going to be playing, 15, 18, whatever it is, your best play, someone is going to get squeezed out of playing time who's a better player than Jaxson Hayes, whether that's Taurean Prince, whether that's, Jared Vanderbilt or Max Christie, Rui Hachimura, whoever it is, someone has to sit in order to kind of accommodate that. It's just not worth it.
Look, I get that Anthony Davis does not want to play the 5 as much as he plays the 4. I get that he wants to be more of a power forward than a center. Respectfully, to quote Don Draper, that's what the money's for. I mean, that's why you're making $40-something million a year. It's to help offset the inconvenience of playing center. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but it's true.
You could have gone Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. I don't care.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I have sincere empathy. I also don't care. Right. Both things can be true.
Let's talk about the starting lineup, and let's talk about the guard rotation, because the other place that people are, I think, really interested to see what happens when the preseason rolls around, how it shakes out in the regular season, particularly around point guard. And to that respect, D'Angelo Russell found himself a little bit at least on NBA Twitter on Wednesday. So we'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Ibotta. And if you're picking up some burgers and dogs for a summer barbecue, why not get some cash back for it with Ibotta? If you're looking to expand your back-to-school wardrobe for the kids, again, Ibotta. Summer vacation's coming up, but you're dreading buying all those necessities before taking off. Stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Again, with Ibotta, you're already spending the money, so get some cash back for your trouble with Ibotta. Either link your loyalty account or upload the receipt after you shop. Get your cash back. It's really easy. The average Ibotta user gets $120 a year in real cash back. Again, real cash, not points that nobody ever uses. And you can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta using the code LOCKED when you register. Go to the App Store, Google Play Store, and download the free Ibotta app and use that code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use that code LOCKED.
So, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about Austin Reeves here in a second in the context of the conversation we're about to have. But it is where there's a lot of footage floating around the Twitter machine. Excuse me, Andy, the X machine. NBA. Well, we have to start. We can't call it NBA Twitter anymore. By the way, I did that in the last segment. There's no such thing as NBA Twitter anymore. It's just NBA X.
Yeah, that's not going to take off.
It doesn't.
You know what I was talking about before? This center that can somehow play the three defensively and match up with AD on both sides of the ball. That guy's not a thing. Neither is NBA X. Not a thing.
It's like when fans are like saying, like, they can't sign Christian Wood. They need to sign a guy who can body up and stop Nikola Jokic in the playoffs. So they need to sign that guy for $1 million, like to their 14th roster spot.
Yeah, have fun with that.
But there's some stuff floating around in NBA social media with showing Austin Reeves getting, in his Team USA jersey. He's playing with the World Cup team this summer, and it is pretty cool. And it is another reminder of a pretty remarkable ascension for a player. You look at the rest of that roster, and it's all lottery picks, late first rounders. A guy like Pancaro, who's a number 1 pick. Anthony Edwards, high lottery. Brandon Ingram, Jaren Jackson, high lottery. Everyone else is a first round pick except Jalen Brunson, who was a 33, and then undrafted Austin Reeves. That is the company that he is with on this team. We watched him play, so we kind of saw it coming a little bit, like, wow, this kid's good. But this is not normal. It isn't.
No. We talked, though, before about when he was named to this team. When you look at both this roster, like in terms of what guys on this team have accomplished, but also the last roster and the names involved with this and the type of careers the younger guys went on to have, Austin Reeves is, if nothing else, in company right now that sets himself up for a pretty good trajectory. Like, generally speaking, if you are a member of this team, your career is really good. I'm not saying you're going to end up an MVP or all NBA, but you're going to have a nice career. You're going to have an upper echelon in the NBA career, like upper third of the league career. That's really good.
And, I'll be interested to see, this is a good team. And, you're talking about, some really good players and very good defenders and guys like Tyrese Halliburton and, Brandon Ingram. And we all know what Jaren Jackson Jr., DPOY, and Walker Kessler, 7-footer, and, a lot of really good players, Josh Hart, who is in himself a glue guy. I think by the time this is over, Reeves is going to be playing a lot.
Yeah.
I realize that means, whatever, maybe, someone sitting, Paolo Banchero or some, Bridge. I don't know who it is, but you look at what a coaching staff would want, and it's Steve Kerr and it's Eric Spoelstra and it's Ty Lue and Mark Few. What those guys would want, in a team that's put together quickly. I just feel like he is the type of player that any good team, particularly a good team, would want to play a lot, because he's going to make everybody else better while also contributing himself.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
Such a good connector of players.
Yep. Yeah, I think he's going to have a really good time with this and a really successful time.
So we'll see if we can get back to this a little bit because it did come up in the D'Lo conversation with Pat Bev. They both talked a little bit about Austin Reeves, but this question of point guard for the Lakers and who plays where and who starts and especially who finishes is something that is central to the question of the rotation. For what it's worth, Jovan has the same starting lineup I think we are expecting, which is D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis. But there is still
by the way, really quick, I'm not sold on the idea of Rui starting. I think it's a good possibility, but I'm not sold on it.
I'm not either. But if you ask me to, you have to put 5 names in a hat right now. Those are the 5 names I would put in.
Fair enough.
I think that is the 5 that I would settle on. It is the 5 I think more people would settle on than not. I could see Taurean Prince starting. I could see Jared Vanderbilt starting. But I think, again, right now, early August, that's the 5 I would choose. But there is still some chatter that, could Gabe Vincent start over D'Angelo Russell? Who is going to finish games? Gabe Vincent or D'Angelo Russell? How that gets split up. And one thing that strikes me now is the level of goodwill around Vincent is certainly a lot higher than the level of goodwill around D'Lo.
Yeah, I think because D'Lo was, there's no way around it, a disaster in the Western Conference Finals against Denver. I mean, we are going to be unequivocal about this. He was bad. I think it is overshadowing the fact that his first 2 rounds in the playoffs were good and occasionally quite good. And his regular season with the Lakers, frankly, his regular season with the Lakers and the Wolves was quite good. He put up some of his career best numbers shooting from the field and from behind the arc. And Gabe Vincent had a terrific playoffs, and you and I both like this signing, and we both think he's going to play a very big, very important role with this team. It's important to remember he's only started 35% of his games, 68 out of 195. And if, say, you want to just focus on the last 2 years of his career when he was growing into his own and more established player, he still only started 45% of those games. Like, he is still somebody who has been nowhere close to a full-time starter. And say what you want about D'Angelo Russell and his flaws, which are real. And if you want to argue that he is not cognizant or humble enough about his own flaws, that's a fair argument that anybody can have. D'Angelo Russell is a legitimate starter in the NBA. Like, whether you consider him a point guard, he's one of the 20 best point guards in the league. If you consider him a shooting guard, I think he's one of the 20 best shooting guards in the league, or 20 best combo guard. However you want to put this, you can find an argument for D'Angelo Russell coming off the bench if you think ultimately he will have more of an opportunity to use all of his skill set coming off the bench as a focal point. That's fine. I mean, that can be a reasonable argument, but he's a legitimate proven starter, even if you think he's a low-end starter. Gabe Vincent isn't. Doesn't mean he can't be, but he's not proven.
And, and I say this not to, as you say, not to disparage the signing, not to criticize, not to say it was bad, not to say the Lakers were wrong. And all that. Vincent's postseason, even this year, was really good in some really high-profile moments. He was really good against the Celtics. But it was spotty in parts. And his 3-point shooting this year in the playoffs was 38%, which for him is well above any kind of career norm. Last year it was 31% in 23 and a half minutes a game, 4.5 3-pointers per game. So it's good volume. And also, so 2 years ago, his playoff shooting was terrible. I don't know what the right answer is for this one. Like, I think Russell's going to start. I also think Russell's a better player, kind of overall, but it really is going to be based on what you need, because better and more appropriate in terms of starting and finishing are 2 very different questions. So I want to explore that a little bit next. All right. So, I mean, look, I admit I am developing a bit of of a sort of a natural defense of Russell, because I feel like the backlash to him has been a little unreasonable. I feel like I am concerned that even in August, we're getting into this sort of self-fulfilling space where like, oh, the Lakers are only signing him to trade him. And like, we're going to be watching every good game, bad game. Is he on the block yet? Is he not? Are the Lakers going to move him yet? Are they not? And you kind of create this self-fulfilling thing where, Russell is already out the door and not the guard the Lakers need to,
he might be.
They're going to compete.
He actually might be.
But part of that's because like there always needs to be, every year you cover this team, there's always got to be that sort of thing. And if you take away the potential of trading Russell and like wondering, is D'Lo going to be the guy that you need? There's not a lot of stuff to latch on to with this team. There's no Russell Westbrook this year. There's no, big, LeBron is, here presumably until either Bronny is in the league or decides when. Like, there's no drama there. They're going to have an Anthony Davis extension. It seems like there's not a lot to latch onto except this question around Russell. And I just, especially at 18 million. I don't think he deserves the amount of like consternation that he seems to get. And like, he's being undervalued in some ways, while guys like Vincent and I think to some degree Rui are being overvalued because they're easier to like.
Well, I am more solid on Rui than you are, as far as like feeling like what we saw. I liked his regular season, I think, more than you did, more than some other people did as well, but more sold on what we saw in the playoffs with Rui. I think I'm just more bullish on him than you are.
So people that maybe not listen all the time, it's not that I need to see more before I am ready to say that the player he was in the playoffs is a player he is going forward. And again, big difference between doing it at whatever he was. What was he, 6 or 7 million last year versus 17?
Right. But I don't think it's going to become that big of an issue, because $17 million in the NBA isn't that much to, I think, really create that much scrutiny to begin with. As far as D'Lo goes, one last thing I wanted to get into with him versus Vincent before we started talking about the conversation between him and Pat Bev. I think Vincent could end up more likely to close games than D'Lo, just because he's a better defender. And very often that defensive mistakes, I think, can start hurting you more in crunch time than just missing shots, because everybody misses shots. D'Lo's hit some big shots down the stretch too in games, but I think that defensive reliability could have more cachet and currency down the stretch of important games than the offense. Some of this is going to depend on just how he's playing and who else is out there on the floor matchups, stuff like that.
Well, I'll say this: if you're correct about Hachimura and the shooting and all that kind of stuff, you are much more likely to see Gabe Vincent close games, because you have the floor spacing, a little more floor spacing than you need, because you've got Hachimura who can step out at in the high 30s, and Reeves in the high 30s, low 40s, hopefully even, and those guys who can take and make shots. D'Lo's floor spacing becomes less of a thing. And especially, I guess, if you're one of these people who believes that Vincent is closer to a 36-37% guy with the Lakers. Again, I need to see that first.
Sure.
So you're right. I mean, your bullishness though on Rui, my big point there is, would also make it easier for Gabe Vincent to finish games.
I do think that we talked about likability. Gabe Vincent, I think, projects more of an inherent likability, or, sort of broad likability, than D'Lo. Gabe Vincent's origin story is more of a humble rise, whereas D'Lo was a second overall pick. He's always been a very polarizing player in the league. He's got a lot of swag to his personality, which I think can be a lot of fun, but it can rub people the wrong way when you're not elite or not always consistent. On the Pat Bev podcast, D'Lo acknowledged, with, I think, not even entirely understanding all the whys, that sometimes when he says stuff, it either comes out the wrong way, gets misinterpreted. I think he often just says it the wrong way. But he can be.
He also just he doesn't read the room. He is extremely confident, and for all these sort of I don't want to be misunderstood. He's also not somebody who's not going to say what he thinks. And we go back to exit interviews when he was talking about his game and like the confidence he has in his game and what he needs to improve. And he basically kind of summed up with, you don't want to change what you are. Sometimes you have to lean into your strengths as a player rather than like worrying about every weakness. And like, and the thought behind it was actually interesting and legitimate, but timing.
Wrong time. And like this clip that's gotten a lot of rounds from D'Lo on the Pat Bev podcast, Patrick Beverley is talking about how D'Lo had his best shooting season ever and that it's not getting talked about. And he's really like talking about it in terms of media, like it's not getting a lot of shine. And D'Lo starts saying like, nobody's talking about it. What I got to do, Pat? And Patrick Beverley is egging him on to some degree and propping up his guy. And it's clear these guys are really close. And
the whole segment was the whole sequence was Pat Bev complaining that D'Lo's contract is too small and the league wasn't valuing him enough.
Right. And to be clear, D'Angelo did not complain about his money at all. He didn't necessarily argue with Pat Bev, but who's going to argue when someone says you should get $100 million? Like, who's going to say, you know what, I'm cool with 40? Like, that's just too much. But like D'Lo just playing along with this, and I think there's also some undertone of D'Lo feeling underappreciated or feeling like people don't think he's as good as he thinks he is. Whether you think he's right or wrong, it ain't the right time to be bringing this up if you want to get people on your side.
What percentage of NBA players would you say, Andy, think they are better than either the media or their teams like sort of value them at?
I would say 99.9, the 0.1 being Jokic, because he genuinely does not seem to give a rat's ass about any of this stuff.
And so like, it's always been a funny criticism to me to where, it's one thing if it impacts, a guy starts throwing hissy fits, won't play the role he's being asked to play, has a bad attitude, whatever it is, like it can be a problem, but it's never been one with Russell. Certainly wasn't last year with the Lakers. And after a understandably, being kind of slapped with the unserious tag early in his career between the Nick Young stuff and the cell phone and all that other thing. It's the notion of being upset with Russell for thinking he's undervalued financially and around the league reputationally. You'd have to hate every player in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, look, you occasionally hear whispers from people connected to the team that D'Lo sometimes lacks a certain seriousness that I think also just in a lot of ways can get back to self-awareness. Mm-hmm. But, that's just kind of his personality. But at the end of the day, if he plays well enough, he plays well enough. And as you noted, and I think it's true, playing well enough at $18 million is different than playing well enough at 31. He also, too, he and Pat Bev in this podcast, they were raving about Reeves. I mean, raving. Pat Bev said that he thinks Reeves is a top 12 IQ guy in the league. D'Lo just kept calling him a killer over and over. He also told a really funny story about one of the first times he ever played against Reeves. Turns out I didn't know this. D'Lo's brother is his agent. And I think also does, I didn't know, but he also does helps D'Lo with prepping for games, like film, stuff like that. And there was this sequence where D'Lo said Reeves had the ball and just put him in a blender, like absolutely cooked him. And D'Lo, as he's getting back on the other side, looks over at his brother, and his brother's like, dude, I told you. Like, I told you about this guy. He's like, yeah, I know. He loves playing with Reeves. Yeah. The other thing that I thought this just popped into my head, he was asked about the difference between playing with Kobe and playing with LeBron. And for a long story short, he said it was almost hard to compare because Kobe was in the final year of his career, obviously never recovered from the Achilles. He had already said he was going to retire. he was focused on a lot of other stuff just because he couldn't perform basketball wise the way he wanted to. Whereas LeBron is still playing at a level where he's a focal point of a championship team. But it got me thinking about who are the guys who've played with both Kobe and LeBron. I did a little quick run through on Basketball Reference. I think I have the list. I think it's the list. If I missed anybody, it couldn't be that many people. Here's the list, I think. D'Angelo Russell, Larry Nance Jr., Jordan Clarkson, Ronny Turioff, Shannon Brown, Ira Newble.
Ira Newble.
Yes. Good guy, by the way. Ira Newble was a really good guy.
Newble. Yeah.
Chris Mim, Dwight Howard, Carlos Boozer during LeBron's rookie year, Shaq, Joe Smith, Antoine Jameson, and this was the most random of them all. I did not realize he was even still in the league during LeBron's rookie season. Jelani McCoy. That is random.
Any list that Jelani McCoy appears on, he's probably going to be the guy you go at. Like, look at the most random guy appears like any list. I'm a little surprised the list is that long, but then, you realize, they had a pretty significant overlap. It is telling that how many of those guys are active
currently?
Yeah.
Nance, Clarkson,
D'Lo. Right. I mean,
unless somebody gives Dwight another deal.
That's true. That to me is sort of the interesting one. It's like, like how many guys it was, but like, you're down to sort of 3 active guys who played with both. We'll talk more about D'Lo another, a lot because,
time to kill.
But also, it's a Lakers podcast. He's the starting point guard. I mean, it's gonna come up. But I just have a lot of thoughts about that. We did not get into when we were talking rotation. One of the other really interesting spots is that backup forward spot with Jared Vanderbilt and Taurean Prince that Jovan wrote about a little bit, and I know we are both very interested in. So we'll maybe try to do that before the end of the week. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with 20,000 subscribers, become the guy who gets us or gal who gets us closer to 21,000. Be that person. And we'll see everybody on Friday.